All right, I did want to make one quick reminder as we welcome Natalie and Adam on stage. You do have a way to ask additional questions, as we have a lot of good questions in the room. You may not get to ask it in the session, but on the back of your badge, there is something called slido.com where you can submit online questions. We won't be answering these in real time, but we do encourage you to submit those just so that we can capture everything from the audience today. So with that, let's get into our next session. We've got an essential primer on GCDs, DFCs, and GMAs. Lots of alphabet soup there. We have Natalie Ballew, who's the Groundwater Division Director at Texas Water Development Board, and Adam Foster, the Executive Director of Texas Alliance of Groundwater Districts.
All right, thank you all. Again, Adam Foster, I'm the Executive Director of Texas Alliance of Groundwater Districts. Been in the groundwater game for a little over 20 years. I actually started my groundwater experience studying springs of West Texas out here, so I was delighted when I got the opportunity to come and talk about groundwater at this venue. So when we first got invited, Natalie and I sat down together and we wanted to have a little fun with this presentation. So we were trying to come up with something that we could basically analogize between groundwater management and something that happens out here. So we are going to go on a little adventure today. We're going to compare it to a hike, which, as everybody knows, it's very popular out here. So to get us started off, we're going to talk a little bit about the ground rules for the hike. We all have access to the hike and explore the land, but we can't damage it, and we cannot basically hurt our fellow hikers. Similarly, in Texas, we have what's called the rule of capture. It is common law doctrine that basically says that you have the ability to pump as much groundwater you want without malice or wanton waste. And even if you impact your neighbor, they have no recourse. So those are the ground rules for our hike today. So a little bit about groundwater ownership in Texas. Every landowner who owns land owns the water underneath the property unless those water rights have been severed. Everybody who has land is entitled to drill for and produce groundwater underneath their land, but not necessarily a specific amount. We're going to talk a little bit later about what GCDs are, but where there's a GCD, they can limit production based upon spacing and some other factors that we'll go into. And in some instances, if there's regulations go too far, they can be taken to court for takings claims. So why is this hike important? Well, groundwater, as many of you know, is extremely important. It supplies over 60% of the water in Texas. Rural communities are disproportionately affected by groundwater issues. They rely heavily on groundwater. It supports all major sectors. Anything, especially out here, is going to rely on groundwater where you have very little surface water rights left. Additionally, in a lot of areas of the state, well, all areas of the state, surface water is treated differently and it's fully allocated. So in many areas, the only way to access fresh water is through groundwater, okay? And then obviously it's the most easily accessible to many Texas communities. So this is not a, excuse me, trying to figure out where I'm at right here. Okay, so we need trail guides when we're looking at groundwater, right? And that's what GCDs are. What GCDs are local entities that know the terrain, they know the trails, they know the hikes. They can help hikers avoid perilous activities and keep them on sustainable paths. And they also have some tools that we'll go through later that help people use the water, or the landowners use the water. So in Texas, there are 98 groundwater conservation districts. Here's a map. Anywhere where you don't see a colored outline, that is what we call the white areas or the unprotected areas. What districts are the state preferred method of groundwater management in order to protect private property rights and balance the conservation and development of groundwater to meet the needs of the state. They are specifically designed for local control and local management of groundwater resources. The boards that make up or govern districts are typically ranchers and farmers that use groundwater resources in the area. Sometimes you may have some employees that also work for water purveyors or companies that sell water, but the vast majority of the people that are governing these districts are local water users. And again, they're all based on local control. So what they are, they're political subdivisions of the state with the specific authority to manage groundwater. And Texas Chapter 36 outlines the authority and the powers that GCDs have to manage those resources. Specifically, within the boundaries of a district, they modify the rule of capture. They do not do away with the rule of capture, but they can modify the rule of capture. They are specifically instructed by the legislator to manage to a desired future condition, which Natalie is going to go into a little bit more depth later. But their fundamental mandate is to conserve those resources while also balancing property rights for the landowner. And they also are instructed by the legislature to use the best available science that they have at their disposal in making management and permitting decisions. So, what kind of tools do districts have? I've got some props. So, every good guide needs to come equipped with tools that they can use to help their hikers keep them safe, keep them on path. So, first one, they've got a notebook. They keep track of all the hikers, where there are. They can put down times. This is analogous to permitting and well or water use reports. So they're keeping that data. They know where the wells are. They know how much water is being used for the most part for non-exempt wells. And then they also can keep track of overall uses throughout the year or during a certain period of time. Another tool that they have is a flashlight. This is analogous to DFC curtailment. So at night, when things are getting wrong, kind of scary and people need some extra help, they can curtail pumping. Another one is a compass. This keeps them online and in the right direction as far as water use. So they are making sure they're tracking how much water is actually being used. They have binoculars, and in this case, these are very specific binoculars. Thank you. Yes, we need multiple trail guides sometimes. So, binoculars, these are specific tools that districts can develop, such as local groundwater models or monitoring networks to see where trends are happening, locate areas where maybe pumping may have more of an effect on the aquifers or not. They also have a whistle. This is really great for keeping people online or people in line. So if people start to go off the path in the sense that they're pumping too much water, they have the ability to whistle at them and basically tell them to get back in line, reduce their pumping.
What you got in there?
I got a map. Well, it's supposed to be a map. I couldn't find an actual map because nobody really has maps anymore, apparently. But this would be like a management plan. So every district is required to have a management plan that they manage their resources to. So every management plan for every district is going to be different because the local hydrology, the local users, and ultimately what the board decides how they want to manage the groundwater is going to be different. So every district has to have a management plan that outlines how they're going to manage that resource. That management plan has to be approved by the Texas Water Development Board, and anytime they update their DFCs, the districts have to create a new management plan to guide everybody. Lastly, they carry snacks, right? So in this instance, this is all the other things that the districts use, tools that they have as far as research, outreach. They do a lot of education. Some have well plugging programs. There's a lot of additional stuff that districts do just besides the managing. They're a great resource for any individual within a district who needs to know more about conservation, water use, the aquifers around them. So, and I think that's all my tools. Pretty sure. All right. I'm now going to turn it over to Natalie to talk more about our little adventure.
And you can keep all the tools here because I might need them. So, Adam, that was great. It's great to know what tools you have, and it's great to know what resources are out there for all of our trail guides. But there are so many trail guides out there. In fact, I think I see 5 or 6 groundwater districts out there. So we're all venturing on the same goal to if we're working with our analogy, to keep everyone safe and to the end of the hike safely. So it's good for everyone to plan with each other. They might know something that the other one doesn't know, and they can share all this information. And so that's kind of like what groundwater management areas do. Groundwater management areas are groups of groundwater conservation districts. There are 16 of these all across the state. They cover all of the aquifers in the state. And the idea behind this is so that districts who are managing the same resource can get together and plan for the future of that resource. And these groundwater management areas are delineated by the major aquifer boundaries. This is a map, this is probably the first aquifer map we're seeing today, but it shows you all of the major aquifers and then the groundwater management area boundaries aligned with it. And you'll see a mix of some alignment with the aquifer boundaries, some with the county boundaries. We definitely have a mix of it. But generally, all of these groundwater management areas follow the major aquifer boundaries. And so joint groundwater planning is like these trail guides getting together to meet to share their ideas. Groundwater districts are required at least annually to meet and talk about what they've accomplished over the years. They review those management plans. They talk about how all their tools are working for them, and the effectiveness of all their measures to make sure that they're using those tools to the best effectiveness. And they also talk about how they're achieving their desired future conditions. And most of the joint groundwater planning process is related to desired future conditions. So this is essentially what the groundwater planning process is. It happens every 5 years, very similar to our regional water planning process. And so desired future conditions, you can think of it as like your destination if you're going on a hike. There might be many different paths to get there. Maybe there are different spots at the top of a peak that you're trying to get to, but you're kind of going in the same direction as a group of groundwater districts. And what a DFC is, what we call it for short, it's the desired quantified condition of an aquifer at some time in the future. Typically it's about 50 years out into the future, so we're looking like really long term into the future. But most of them are expressed as no more than 10 feet of drawdown over the next 50 years. And no more than, 50 feet of 50% of median available drawdown remaining. It all depends on what, tools that a district has to actually monitor the aquifer conditions. So they want to be setting a desired future condition that they are able to track and monitor. And so these desired future conditions are indeed a policy goal, and but the districts must also manage to achieve those desired future conditions, so they kind of serve a dual regulatory and planning goal. So what all goes into these desired future conditions? You have to take in all of your surroundings whenever you're walking through the desert. So these are the 9 factors that districts are required to consider when they are establishing their desired future conditions. It's the aquifer uses, how is the aquifer being used, where is it being used the most. They have to look at the environmental impacts. So, what would a drawdown of 10 feet overall in this aquifer, what would that do to our spring flow? They have to look at property rights, how their desired future conditions may impact property rights. They consider what's in the state water plan, future projects and things like that. Subsidence, we've heard that there's a little bit of subsidence issue out in this area. I heard that earlier this morning. So how are those DFCs going to impact your subsidence? The feasibility of actually achieving your DFCs. Can you actually reach those goals? Socioeconomic impacts of, having a certain amount of drawdown or not having a certain amount of drawdown, and hydrologic conditions and any other information that's relevant. If you're curious about your own groundwater management area out here, you probably know your groundwater district, and if you don't, they are here. They just met earlier today in one of these joint groundwater planning meetings and talked about all these things. But you can see all the decisions that groundwater districts make in this process and what's called an explanatory report, and those are all posted on the Water Development Board website. And so I mentioned that desired future conditions are policy goals, but to get to the groundwater availability, that's what we want to know. How much can we actually pump? We combine that policy decision with science in the version of our groundwater availability models and any other tools that might be more appropriate. And so this slide shows you kind of the simple equation that we use to determine groundwater availability. And then ultimately, once we combine the policy and the science, we end up with the groundwater availability that we call modeled available groundwater. And districts are required to have an overall goal to balance production with conservation. And so maximum practicable production with conservation. And so I have little water bottles there. So production is like an empty water bottle and conservation is like a full water bottle. And so just to wrap up really, the modeled available groundwater, which is the combination of the policy and the science, is the amount of water that can be pumped to actually achieve your desired future condition. And again, this is what we calculate at the Water Development Board using the tools we have available to us. And it is used by groundwater districts in their permitting, but is not the only factor to consider. So I like to think of it as kind of like a compass, so you can just see if you're headed in the right direction to achieve your desired future condition. And then you might take in new information, new science, new knowledge about your aquifer and kind of readjust things in your next 5-year planning cycle. But an important thing about the modeled available groundwater is that this does become the groundwater availability in the regional water plans and ultimately in our state water plan. And then after they do all this, they reassess everything. They see if they needed some different tools. They see how they did with the tools that they had. And then they plan their next hike. They meet again, they talk to each other, the districts, and plan for their next hike. And then me and Adam will be sitting by the fire after this to, discuss how we did with this planning. And that's it. Happy to take questions.
Figure we use this time, I think we got about 5 minutes to ask specific questions about our hike today. So does anybody have any questions they want about or have about groundwater management, districts in the state, how they do what they're supposed to do, how they guide everybody?
So I have 2 questions. The first one is how you operate the individual districts. Are they managed independently, where one would have rules that are different than their neighbors' rules because of the science and location?
Yes.
And then I have a question about, I have a friend who has a property with an old rock quarry, and there's a lake there now, and the lake stays full because there's springs under it, and the lake is only maybe 20 feet deep. But the aquifer in that area is probably 300 or 400 feet deep. So is that water, the spring water, managed and controlled by the district, or is it surface water?
Okay, so your first question was about individual districts, their rules. Yes, each district comes up with their own rules. Now, typically, districts within the same GMA or that overlie the same aquifer are going to have similar rules. They may not be identical, but they're going to be similar because they are managing to the same DFC, right? Now, there may be some slight differences in, how long they may take to approve a permit or not, or permit length, They may have some different spacing requirements from well to well, but overall, their rules are going to be pretty similar if they're within the same GMA. The second question, I mean, really, without knowing more information about this particular quarry, I mean, if it's not infiltrating into the ground and it's, you know, just sitting there, I mean, it sounds to me like that would be a pond and not, you know, something that's connected to the aquifer below. But if it is a spring, then yes, that would fall under the, okay.
While I come over here, I have a question. How do groups like the Far West Texas Water Planning Group overlay with the GCDs and the GMAs?
So the, this on? Yeah, okay, great. So the groundwater conservation districts actually have representation on the regional water planning groups. There are all sorts of different interests represented on that planning group, and that includes groundwater conservation districts. And then the groundwater districts, they often take the future water management strategies that the regional water planning groups come up, and they incorporate that into their future planning as well. So that kind of aligns those two processes a little bit. In terms of actual overlap, I'd have to look at a map to answer that one.
Okay. Nearly all of my consulting work in my career as a hydrologist and as a groundwater economist has been out in West Texas, so I know this area very well. But I now live in Bastrop County, which is where my family has lived for 190 years. And what I see in Bastrop County is something I think is a direct challenge to the DFCs that you people are working on, because the population growth of Bastrop County, I guarantee you, is far outstripping any projection that was ever been made by the demographers at the Texas Water Development Board. The population has exploded, and now you have people like Elon Musk. I'm not criticizing him, but he's moved into Bastrop County. You have AI centers and data centers that are moving in. People are spilling over from Travis County. They're coming in from the east, from Harris County, stopping in Bastrop because they can't afford the property in Travis County. And all of that, I think, really challenges the DFCs that particular region is attempting to develop, because it blows past what I think the DFCs are trying to accomplish long term. And I'm curious to what extent there's enough flexibility in these DFCs, and I'm kind of very skeptical about these things, but I'm curious about how much flexibility there is in these DFCs to help the groundwater districts manage this long term. And another thing I want to point out is, I know that we have regional groundwater planning, the GMAs, but as I travel around the state and I've talked with people in different counties, what I consistently hear from people is there's not a recognition that they need to work with people in surrounding counties, adjoining counties, to manage groundwater. Groundwater does not give a flip about a political boundary. But what I consistently hear is we have to protect our groundwater, and that is we're going to make sure nobody else can come in here and do anything that we don't want them to do, not understanding that working cooperatively with people in adjoining counties would benefit them greatly. But you still have that reluctance on the part of people in the different counties actually to do that. So while you have the GMAs with this goal of cooperating as I think you would like for them to do, I don't see that happening.
Well, the groundwater districts are required to participate in this joint groundwater planning process. And so pretty much all of the groundwater management areas that I attend, they have a representation from all of the districts. Maybe there's one or two that maybe isn't available on that particular day. But to go back to your earlier question about the desired future conditions and how flexible they are, these are goals that can be reset every 5 years by the districts whenever they are doing that cooperative planning. So there is flexibility for the district to go back and be like, hey, this wasn't working. We need to reassess this and adjust for what we need now.
Well, in the case of a county like Bastrop, I think you're going to have to rethink your DFCs significantly, because the population growth there has far exceeded, I think, anything that we saw in the first round of water planning here in Texas and in subsequent rounds of water planning. So Bastrop and other and surrounding counties there are experiencing population growth that no one ever foresaw, And what you hear now are complaints day in and day out about the number of people pouring into the county and about the strain on their groundwater resources and surface water resources where you can find them.
I would definitely encourage you to get involved in the Groundwater Management Area 12 groundwater planning, because you can watch their meetings online and you can provide input and kind of hear what they're thinking and how they are tackling that population growth in their current round of planning.
Yes, sir.
I think it's around 100 counties that are in the so-called white areas that don't have groundwater districts. Some of those are adjacent, they're in GMAs, but what do you think the state should do about those white areas that don't have groundwater districts that are still basically working under the rural capture?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the white areas, unregulated areas, cause a lot of issues, not just for districts themselves, but for the people that live in those areas. I mean, from my perspective, if you want to have effective groundwater management in Texas, every county needs to be covered by a district. And that's the only way currently in statute that groundwater can be managed is through a groundwater conservation district. There's no other mechanism or framework in Texas for groundwater management. And I think the legislature is going to take a very close look at that this upcoming session to what exactly to do about the white areas and the unprotected areas. Because again, it's a lot of issues are currently coming up, but they've been coming up for the past 10 years or so, but there are certain entities and individuals that are exploiting the fact that there's some areas that don't have regulation. So, and we're seeing a big push from areas that have traditionally resisted groundwater or GCDs now coming and wanting to have those discussions on, how to create one, what that really means for them and their constituents. So.
I think we got one more question.
I was going to ask, how effective is a groundwater conservation district being in the Panhandle where they're running out of water?
Well, the districts in the Panhandle, we call that, they manage decline, right? So the Panhandle is the Ogallala specifically is very different than other aquifers in Texas. It recharges extremely slowly, and there are a lot of users there. So they've developed or they've adopted strategies. They know that it's going to decline, but they basically want to slow that decline as much as possible, right? And they use the existing tools that they have to do that. They are required by statute to, this balancing test of provide for production, the highest level of production, while also conserving. So they in the Panhandle have adopted these management strategies.
Thank y'all so much.
Thank you.